everybody, I am here today very excitedly to let you know that I've done an update to my jelly roll blanket pattern. So the reason I've popped in a video, I think generally speaking, I know from feedback that I've had, a lot of people like a visual rather than, a big whole spiel of writing. So I thought I would do both. I have added in a page onto the pattern just listing lots of details that I'm going to let you know now. But I just thought it might be fun to come and do a little video as well. So this is my jelly roll blanket. This is my original jelly roll blanket that I knit, 3 years ago now. I think the pattern's been out for getting on for 3 years. And during that time, and particularly lately, I would say the past maybe 6 months or so, it's been really popular to knit a DK version of this design. So the original pattern is knit using fingering weight, and a lot of people now have been doing DK weight versions. So I thought, okay, let's come and just have a little chat about that. I do get a lot of questions about knitting a DK version, and I always reply to people and let them know whatever it is that they are asking questions on. And it occurred to me that I thought, do you know what, let's just do this update to the pattern. So you will find in the pattern now an extra page which has got a couple of photos of the swatches that I did, and then all of the information that I can provide to you, I guess, in the knitting of a DK weight version. So the first thing I'm going to say actually is that this blanket, you can knit it in whatever weight of yarn you want, as long as you stay consistent throughout the knitting of it. If you wanted, you could knit it in chunky weight. If you've got a big mountain of chunky, or I think it's called bulky in some other countries, if you've got an excess of that, say you crocheted a blanket or something used in it and you might have some leftovers, you could absolutely knit a chunky weight version. Like I said, as long as you stay consistent throughout, you can use whatever weight of yarn you want. The only difference really is the needle size and the cast on number for your strips. So what I've done to modify it for the DK weight version is I looked at the kind of width of the strips here that I get with the fingering weight, and I've tried to get fairly close to that. They are a little bit wider, but I think that's kind of, in a way, necessary because it's a thicker yarn. I think it looks better just slightly wider than this. And also it means that you can cast on a number of stitches which is not ridiculously small and makes it kind of annoying. If you had too few stitches for each of your strips, I think it can be a bit laborious, can't it, constantly turning your work. So I've done some swatching and I've figured out what I would do, and I'm going to tell you what I would do if I was working a DK weight version. Now, that's not to say that yours will be the same. You might do a swatch and decide to cast on more stitches or less. You might use a different needle size to me. These are all variable, you do whatever suits you, but I'm just going to tell you what I liked and what I did. So I've got here 2 different swatches. One of them is still sort of on the needles. But what I did, because a lot of people, when they knit DK versions of this blanket, what they use is fingering weight held double, because that gives you an approximate DK weight. Having done some swatches, I would say actually, and I've kind of always thought this, but depending on your fingering weight as well, but generally speaking, I think that fingering weight held double is slightly heavier than a standard single strand of DK. And certainly that's what I found when I worked these 2 swatches. So this one is fingering weight held double, and this one here, which I've still kind of got on the needles, I just started another little one here. This one here is a single strand of DK. So what I did was I compared the gauges and I weighed each of my strips, the first strip. So I cast on the same number of stitches, I've used the same needle, and I knit the same number of rows so that I can make a direct comparison. So the gold one here, this was the first strip that I knitted, and this is fingering weight held double. So I cast on 15 stitches. That was my cast on number that I found worked really nicely. I did try a few different stitch counts, but 15 gives a really nice width of a stripe, I think. And it is, you know, when I compared it to the original blanket, it's just a smidge wider than the original, but I think that looks really nice, and I didn't find the reduction in the stitch count bothered me at all. You know, it was lovely. It was perfectly pleasant to knit. The row didn't go so quick that you're kind of turning every second. So I found that to be a great stitch count. So 15 stitches for each of my strips. So when I weighed, I worked this strip and then I worked the pink one, exactly the same as I've said, and I weighed them, and this one here, which was fingering held double, what's that, wrong side, this weighed almost 10 grams, and I got 6 inches of knitting out of that 10 grams. So it's 10 grams in total, so that effectively would be 5 grams of each of your minis. They're not necessarily minis, of each of your 2 fingering weight yarns. So 10 grams in total got me 6 inches of knitting. And then I did exactly the same thing with the DK weight held just single strand. This one weighed just under 8 grams. So definitely lighter, and it was a bit shorter than the other one. I got the same stitch gauge. My stitch gauge was 6 stitches to the inch, but my row gauge was slightly different. So with the, let me see if I can put these on top of each other here. With the single strand of DK, I had to knit more rows effectively. You can see it doesn't quite come up to the length of the fingering held double. So you would need to knit more rows effectively to get the same length. It's not a lot different, but it is a little bit different. So I think that's just worth saying. And then the other thing really that is most apparent for me with these 2 fabrics is the squish factor. The fingering weight held double is thicker, it feels much thicker, and it's got a lot more squish than the single strand of DK. This DK, I should tell you actually, is Drops Daisy, which I'm just swatching. It's a new to me yarn, so I'm just doing a bit of a review of it. So this is a great little sample to work up just to try out the yarn. It's really nice, but I'm going to be doing a full review of that. So yeah, this is nowhere near as squishy as this. The choice is yours really. I mean, the other thing with a fingering weight one, I keep holding these up randomly like this, but the other thing with the fingering weight one is there's way more opportunity to play around with colour, I think, because you most likely you will be using either minis or leftovers from various other projects, and you can kind of, like here, particularly this green one, I love the way this came out, and I held like a solid, well, maybe a tonal together with a speckled, and you know, you can create your own colours by doing that. It's really, really fun. Whereas with the DK, more likely they would be solid colours like this. It could be that you're using indie dyed DK yarn, you know, you might have a bunch of leftovers from that, so it might look very much like this. But I would say from the ones that I've seen, I have seen a lot of people who have worked up samples using things like Stylecraft DK, perfect for baby blankets, you know, brilliant, throw it in the washer. But their yarns are solid, so it would look more like this, you know, depending on how you change your colours and things for your strips. Whereas with fingering weight held double, I think it looks more like my original blanket. And if I was going to knit a full-size DK weight version, I would do this, fingering weight held double, because this for me is way more fun than a single strand of DK. But again, that's a very personal choice, and I think they would both look equally as lovely But for me, this is more interesting to knit than single strand of DK. So yeah, I mean, that's the sort of basic information. So what I need to tell you now is the needle size. So I used a 3.75mm needle. I did try it with 4mm and a 3.5mm, and I found that particularly for the fingering held double, 3.75 just felt right to me. The DK one was fine with this needle size, but if I was going to make one using a single strand of DK, I would probably go down. I would probably use a 3.5mm because it would just give a slightly tighter gauge and will allow for, you know, over time for the blanket to stretch and not get too out of shape. But 3.75mm was like the sweet spot for me, if you like. For this, it just is lovely. It's a nice dense fabric. You know, you can't really see through it. It doesn't feel like it's going to overly stretch over time. Really, really lovely. Now, the other thing with regards to needle size is the border. So this blanket has an I-cord border that is worked after you finish your blanket. You can see it here. So for the fingering weight version, I went up 2 needle sizes. Now, for this one, because I've used 3.75mm, 2 needle sizes will be 4.25mm, and we don't have a 4.25mm. I've never seen one. It goes 4mm and then 4.5, doesn't it? So I would go for a 4.5mm for the border, because we don't want that border to be tight. And I think only going up to a 4mm, there's a chance that that's not going to be enough stretch, because one thing I wanted to make sure when I did that I-cord border is that it still had lots of stretch. So I would use a 3.75mm for knitting the blanket, and then a 4.5mm needle for doing your I-cord border. So that's really all the information that you're going to need to knit a heavier weight version of your jelly roll blanket. Like I say, it's all detailed in the pattern, so you can have a read through of that, make any notes as well extra that, you know, I might have said other things that I haven't written down, but I think I've covered everything. The very final thing that I want to say, actually, and I have originally said this in the notes that are in the pattern already right at the beginning, but particularly if you are knitting fingering weight held double, I would not mix superwash and non-superwash yarns. So I would say, generally speaking, most fingering weights are going to be superwash, because I think a lot of people knit socks and then put the leftovers into their blankets. So they're going to be superwash, I would say, more often than not. But yeah, always check. Don't mix superwash and non-superwash, because a few reasons really. They knit up differently. They can kind of look slightly different, but also the main reason is for laundering the item. You know, you're not going to be able to launder it in a machine if you've put non-superwash yarns in there as well. So yeah, don't mix the 2 types of yarn. You can mix bases if you're going to do the fingering weight. I've mixed bases, not a problem. There's sparkle yarn in here, there's 80-20, there's 75-25, not a problem. Some are slightly thicker than others, but in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't make a difference. So it's totally fine to mix bases, just don't mix superwash with non-superwash. So there we go, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that little update, and you can all go off now and gather all of your supplies and start knitting a DK version of your jelly roll blankets.